In the corridors of a 15th-century palace, a secret lingered, one so dangerous that people feared to even whisper it. The name of Princess Eleonora was almost erased from history, yet in 1456 it echoed through every corner of the castle. She was only 15 when physicians, summoned in secret, confirmed the unthinkable. The heir to the throne was pregnant. No husband, no betrothal. For the royal family, this was worse than war. In those days, a princess's virtue was not her own. It was the property of the state. Her innocence meant alliances, treaties, the safety of the dynasty itself. A single rumor of her fall could topple the crown, spark rebellion, and tear the kingdom apart. The king held power only by a thread. Dynastic struggles had left him surrounded by enemies, and now one mistake from his daughter threatened to destroy everything. The doctors, brought in under cover of night, were locked inside her chambers and forced to swear silence under pain of death. The queen prayed for an error, but the diagnosis was clear. In the flicker of candlelight, one word was spoken that everyone feared: child. Rumors spread faster than fire. Servants noticed the signs: altered gowns stitched tighter, her changing walk, the sudden appearance of physicians. The more the court tried to hide the truth, the louder the whispers became. Everyone understood: if the truth came out, the dynasty would fall. This was the beginning of a story they would later try to erase forever. The autumn of 1456 marked the moment when Eleonora's secret stopped being a family scandal and became a national catastrophe. The king gathered councils by night, not to seek justice, but to answer one question: how to save the throne. Torches were extinguished, leaving only a single candle, while his closest men sat around the long table. Their task was simple: invent a lie the world would believe. No one asked who was guilty or who had done this to the girl. That no longer mattered. The only debate was how to bury the truth. Some proposed a rushed marriage to a minor noble who would be paid for his silence. Others insisted Eleonora should be declared gravely ill and hidden away in a convent. The cruelest suggested ending the pregnancy by any means necessary, even if it cost the girl her life. The court lived in fear. Everyone knew that one mistake, one careless word, could cost them their heads. Servants saw the changes. Her companions and ladies-in-waiting were dismissed, her windows covered in cloth, guards stationed at her door. To outsiders, she was simply ill, but all suspected that the illness was nothing but a cover. The king was furious. He did not search for the guilty. He did not defend his daughter. All he cared about was the dynasty. One whispered that a princess carried a child without marriage could become a weapon in enemy hands, and he would do anything to keep that weapon away from them. Meanwhile, under torture, the servants began to talk. Piece by piece, a dark picture emerged. Some spoke of secret visits from the Duke of Belvoir, the queen's own brother. Others recalled expensive gifts he brought his niece. At first, these seemed trivial details, but together they became evidence. Rumors spread that the Duke himself might be the father of the child, and those rumors raced through the corridors faster than any letter could travel.
When the name of the Duke of Belvoir was first whispered, the Queen's face turned pale. He was her brother, the man entrusted with armies and diplomacy, the man who had always posed as a noble protector of the family. To the court, he was the model of knightly honor, a brave warrior, a refined patron of poets and artists. But behind that mask lurked something no one dared say aloud. Small details now looked sinister. His constant visits to Eleonora's chambers when her ladies were absent, his extravagant gifts, rare books, jewels, fine fabrics. Servants, broken under torture, confessed that the girl became silent and tense in his presence, as if paralyzed by fear. The more they gathered, the clearer the picture became. And the clearer it was who had ruined the princess, the more obvious the royal family's choice: to close their eyes. To admit the truth would not only destroy the honor of the house, it would destroy the dynasty itself. The Duke commanded his own army, had powerful allies, and knew secrets that could bring the king down. Eleonora was left in the shadows, as though she no longer existed. She hoped her mother would protect her, that the queen would stand by her side. But when she finally gathered the courage to tell everything, her words met no sympathy, no defense. The queen's face shifted from horror to rage to cold understanding. This truth was too dangerous for the world to hear. The mother made her choice. She stood with her brother, not with her daughter. And from that moment, Eleonora's fate was sealed. Behind closed doors, a bargain was struck that would decide her future. The king and the Duke of Belvoir faced one another, and in their exchange there was no family bond, no human feeling. It was not a conversation between a father and an uncle about a girl's life. It was a cold negotiation between two politicians. The king seethed with rage. He knew the truth and despised his wife's brother for disgracing his house, but his fury stayed locked inside. To show it would be to admit weakness. The Duke, by contrast, sat with confidence. He reminded the king how he had supported him in the struggle for the crown, how his troops had crushed rebellions. He hinted that he knew too much about palace secrets, secrets he could easily share with enemies if they tried to break him. Instead of repentance, he offered a deal. Protect my reputation, and the dynasty survives. In return, he agreed to leave the kingdom, officially honored as a diplomat at a foreign court. In reality, it was exile disguised as a reward. For Eleonora, a different fate was prepared. Officially, it was announced that she had fallen gravely ill and was forced to withdraw from the public eye. In reality, she was locked away in guarded chambers, behind bars and silent sentries. The people prayed for her recovery, never knowing that the princess would never again see the light of day.
To the outside world, everything seemed respectable. The Duke had gone abroad to serve the crown, while the princess was battling illness. But inside the palace, everyone knew the truth. A bargain had been struck. Honor and justice were sacrificed to keep the dynasty alive. And so Eleonora became a prisoner in her own home. The rooms where she was confined looked less like a princess's chambers and more like a cell. The windows were bricked up so no one could glimpse her silhouette or notice the changes in her body. Guards stood in the corridors, while only a handful of servants were allowed inside, each warned that a single word could cost their families dearly. Her fine gowns were taken away, her jewels vanished. Instead of silks, she was given coarse dresses of gray wool. Her books, her letters, anything that might distract her or spark hope were removed. Even mirrors were taken, as though her reflection itself was a threat. She was no longer treated as a princess. She had become nothing more than a secret to be hidden. The pregnancy was harsh. A teenage girl, deprived of care and comfort, began to waste away. Physicians came rarely, always escorted by guards, to ensure no hint of her condition escaped. Her only visitor was a priest, ordered not to console her, but to report. Every whispered word of confession was carried back to the king. Servants later told how Eleonora often wept through the night, pressing her hands against her belly and whispering to the child she would never be allowed to keep. Sometimes they heard her sing lullabies in the dark. By day, though, she was forced to wear a mask of stone. Any display of despair could bring punishment even on her. Isolation broke her spirit. Time lost all meaning. Days and nights blurred. Candles burned too quickly or seemed to last forever. She began speaking to herself, repeating prayers and memories to cling to sanity. To the court, she was a sick princess. In truth, she was a captive, forbidden even to dream of rescue. The birth came suddenly, in the middle of the night. In a remote wing of the palace, long abandoned by courtiers, her screams carried so fiercely that the guards clenched their teeth, fighting the urge to run. No doctor surrounded her, no family, only a single midwife, smuggled in from another province. She was chosen precisely because she knew no one in the capital and could vanish without a trace. The months of confinement had weakened the girl. She cried out for hours, drained by pain and fear. Servants stationed outside later confessed that her voice was unforgettable, not just the cry of a mother in labor, but a desperate plea for help, a plea no one intended to answer. At last, a healthy boy was born. Eleonora, in tears and blood, reached out to hold him, but she was allowed only a fleeting glance. The infant was quickly wrapped in rough cloth and carried away. The girl begged, screamed, threatened, fell to her knees before the midwife. The only reply was silence. What became of the child remains a mystery historians still debate. The official version claimed he was sent to a monastery, yet there are no records, not a single document. Some believe the boy was killed immediately to ensure he could never claim the throne. Others insist he grew up under another name, never knowing his mother.
For Eleonora, it was the final blow. She lost the only thing left that tied her to life. That night, along with her baby, her last hope was taken. Weeks later, the capital was shaken by the news. Princess Eleonora was dead. The court declared that the heir had succumbed to a mysterious illness. Church bells tolled, memorial masses were held, courtiers wept in black. Yet the coffin borne with pomp to the altar was empty. It was all theater. In truth, Eleonora was hidden deep within the palace. In a deserted wing, no one was allowed to enter. While crowds laid flowers at an empty tomb, she sat in a damp room behind bricked walls. To the people, she no longer existed. To her family, she had become a dangerous secret, a name that could never be spoken. The erasure began at once. Artists were ordered to destroy portraits of the young princess. One painter dared to protest, refusing to cover her face in a family canvas. He was thrown into a dungeon until he agreed to repaint it. Chroniclers scratched her name from the genealogies. Maids who had known her since childhood were hastily married off to distant provinces or sent to convents, forbidden ever to mention their mistress again. Even her belongings, toys, books, personal keepsakes were burned. Anything that could recall her was destroyed. To the world, Eleonora died young and pure. In reality, she still lived, in chains of silence, stripped of name and future. The lie was built so carefully that even those who suspected the truth chose silence. Asking questions was too dangerous when the king himself demanded oblivion. Thus the young princess became a ghost, one who officially had never existed. After her so-called official death, Eleonora's life became a slow fading. Her new quarters resembled nothing but a dungeon, small rooms with boarded windows, walls damp with mold, heavy doors sealed with iron bolts. Inside, there was only silence, broken by the scrape of guards' boots and the rattle of keys. All human joys were stripped away. Books, pen, paper, forbidden. Conversation with servants, forbidden. They could only leave food and walk away in silence. Even her clothing was rough and gray, as if she had already been forced into monastic life without choice. Everything that might remind her she was once part of the world was taken from her. At first, Eleonora tried to resist. She prayed, demanded to see her mother, banged on the doors, but nothing worked. In confession, the priest told her only one thing: endure and protect the family's honor. His words fell like a sentence.
Slowly, the girl began to break. Time slipped away. Days and nights blurred into one. She counted the footsteps of the guards just to keep her mind from unraveling. She held imaginary conversations with friends who were no longer there. Sometimes at night, they heard her singing lullabies to the child who had been taken from her. With no books, no companionship, her mind sought escape in fantasy. She spoke to shadows, traced letters on the walls with her finger, pretending to write letters. Servants later recalled how her eyes had lost their old light. It was the gaze of someone buried alive within stone walls. To the world, the princess was already dead, but her torment had only begun.
When Eleonora was stripped of everything that could give her hope, she invented a way to speak to the future. She had no paper, no ink, so the walls became her pages. One day she pulled a needle from her dress hem and began scratching into the stone. At first it was just words, dates, prayers, the name of her child. Then whole sentences appeared. The stone tore at her fingers until they bled, but it was the only way to remind herself she was still alive. Later she found other ways. She burned letters onto scraps of cloth with charcoal from the fire. She wrote with drops of her own blood. She hid fragments of fabric beneath the floorboards and in the cracks of the walls. These secret writings were not only confessions, they were poems, prayers, even reflections on power and injustice. She turned her prison into a library of pain, hoping that one day someone would find it. Though forbidden to speak with her, servants sometimes noticed strange things. At night they heard whispers, Eleonora speaking to invisible companions, as though her son was there. She imagined he had grown and come to free her. Each time the door opened, she looked up with hope, expecting him. But it was only a silent guard or a maid with a jug of water. Sometimes new markings were found on the walls. They were quickly plastered over, but she always began again. This was her war. She could not leave her cell, but she could leave traces. She knew, even if they erased her from memory, her words might remain. Each day became a battle, not for freedom, but to make sure her voice would not disappear completely. For Eleonora, the cruelest punishment was not the isolation, but the loss of her child. She had given birth to a son, yet was not even allowed to give him a name. Her desperate cries that night had gone unanswered, the baby carried away into darkness. From then on, every day in captivity was torture by memory. She clung to fragments, the sound of his first cry, the warmth of his small body against hers for just a few seconds. These moments became her only anchor. She sang lullabies, spoke into the emptiness, imagining he was still with her. Sometimes the guards heard her whisper, "My boy will come back for me." But no one ever came. The years of isolation accomplished what stone and chains could not. Eleonora began to lose her grip on reality. At first it was small things. She talked to unseen companions, heard footsteps where there were none. But soon her world split in two, the dead silence of her cell and the imagined life where her son lived beside her. Every morning she prepared for his arrival. She set out a bowl of water, folded her clothes neatly, straightened the bed, as if expecting a guest. In her mind, he had grown into a young man and promised to take her away. But each evening, when the door opened to reveal only a guard with a tray, Eleonora wept, beat the walls, and swore that tomorrow he would surely come.
At times, her hope turned to rage. Servants said she would hurl herself at the guards, screaming, accusing everyone of betrayal.
After these outbursts, she was bound and left on the floor without food or water. Such punishments only broke her further. Year by year, her body weakened too. By 20, she looked like an old woman. Her hair had turned gray, her face was lined, her back bent. The damp air gave her a hacking cough. The darkness left her nearly blind. Yet in rare moments of clarity, her words terrified the guards. She could speak for hours about how lies consume kingdoms, how her name would return, how truth would destroy those who tried to erase her. The guards feared these speeches more than her mad screams, because within them lay not only pain, but a threat. Even stripped of power, Eleonora remained dangerous. Through her memory and her truth. By the age of 25, she had become a shadow of herself. Gray hair, a withered face, a stooped figure, she looked decades older. Nearly blind, constantly coughing, she had lost all signs of resistance. No more screams, no more desperate fights. Instead, a strange, haunting calm. She no longer waited for her son, no longer begged for her mother. Her days passed in silent rituals, arranging her meager belongings in the same order, humming unknown melodies, speaking to invisible people. To the servants, it seemed she had retreated fully into her own world. The guards feared this silence. When she screamed and fought, they could restrain her. But now she seemed to be preparing for something. No one knew what. Some thought she had surrendered. Others suspected she was plotting, carrying a plan she would never share. Her death came at 28. The official account said she fell asleep and did not wake. But the servant who found her body later swore there were marks of struggle on her face, scratches on her hands, as if she had fought desperately for her life or against someone else's hands. Historians still argue, did Eleonora die on her own, exhausted by years of torment, or was she silenced once and for all to close the story forever? Her burial was carried out in secret. No grave marker, no name, no prayer. Her body was placed in the far corner of the palace gardens under the cover of night. Once again, her existence was erased. This time, they hoped forever. But even death did not bring silence. Traces of her struggle remained etched into stone, hidden in secret writings, and alive in the memories of those who had once glimpsed her suffering. Only 5 years after Eleonora's secret burial, the man who had caused her destruction returned to court. The Duke of Belvoir, the very uncle everyone had once suspected, came back to the capital. His diplomatic exile was over, and he rode into the city as if he were a hero. Crowds greeted him with honor. To the people, he was a skilled warrior, a master negotiator, a loyal servant of the crown. No one dared even whisper about his true role. In official speeches, they praised his victories, his diplomacy abroad, his loyalty. Trumpets welcomed him, and even the king was forced to stand at his side and smile.
By this time, the memory of Princess Eleonora had been completely erased. Her name was never spoken, her portraits destroyed, her belongings burned. She was gone from the chronicles, while her tormentor received new honors and wealth. Belvoir lived another 20 years. He was regarded as one of the most respected men in the realm. He founded schools, supported artists, hosted balls, and sent flattering letters to the king. When he died in old age, he was given a magnificent funeral. His body was laid to rest in the cathedral beside rulers, beneath a monument inscribed, "Faithful servant, wise advisor, defender of the dynasty's honor." Not a single word about the girl he had broken and destroyed. No hint of the filth behind the glitter. That silence was louder than any accusation. The world saw only the shining facade, choosing not to notice the darkness hidden behind it. Thus the criminal was immortalized, and the victim was buried twice, once in body and once in memory. After her daughter's disappearance, the queen withered quickly. Outwardly, she remained cold and flawless, but at night she was tormented by nightmares. Servants whispered that screams echoed from her chambers as she cried Eleonora's name and begged for forgiveness. Sometimes she was found kneeling outside the sealed wing of the palace, motionless, her eyes empty. On her deathbed, she reportedly tried to confess to a priest, but the king expelled everyone and silenced her. The last words overheard by a young maid were strange. "The stones will tell the truth." The king lived longer, but his final years were consumed by paranoia. He grew harsher, more suspicious. The smallest disobedience was punished by death. The court lived in constant terror. The older he grew, the more enemies he imagined around him. He passed stricter laws on morality, as if trying to atone for his shame, but in truth, he only plunged the realm deeper into fear. People whispered that he was rotting from guilt. He forbade anyone to mention his daughter's name, yet he himself could never escape it. At times he was seen pale and trembling after walking through the palace. Servants claimed he heard a woman's voice in the walls, whispers in the corridors that froze him in his place. His death brought no grief, no gratitude. The people sighed with relief when he was gone. The throne passed to a distant relative who faced the ruins of a broken kingdom. It was he who first ordered the abandoned wings of the palace to be opened and its property inventoried. No one realized this would be the first step toward uncovering the secret buried under years of lies. Nearly half a century had passed since the official death of the princess, when the new king decided to renovate the old palace. The forgotten wings, untouched for decades, were to be cleaned and rebuilt. Workers tore down walls, pulled out rotten beams, and suddenly stumbled upon sealed rooms no one remembered existed.
What they found inside shocked even men used to decay. Words carved deep into stone, scratched with iron, with needles, with anything that could cut. Dates, prayers, desperate cries. The walls themselves seemed to scream. Beneath the floorboards they discovered scraps of cloth, stained dark brown, with lines written in charcoal and what looked like dried blood. Some messages were simple. "I am alive. My son." Others turned into long rants about power, about family betrayal, about pain. Later, historians would call it the first prison chronicle in Europe, written by a woman they had tried to erase. Terrified, the workers handed everything to the courtiers, and fierce debate followed. Some urged immediate destruction. It was too dangerous to let the truth escape. Others whispered that these were priceless testimonies that could not be lost. In the end, a compromise was struck. All was gathered and locked away in a secret archive, accessible only to the monarch and a handful of trusted men. But even that could not contain the secret. Rumors spread quickly. People said the palace walls had spoken, revealing the truth of the dead princess. Eleonora's name was whispered again. The story they had tried to bury forever had broken through at last. After the discovery of the hidden rooms, the whispers never died again. Archivists and priests recorded fragments, scribbled notes and margins, passed stories from teacher to pupil, from one generation to the next. The truth lived in shadow. Some generations tried to hide it,
others to forget, but it always returned. In monasteries, strange manuscripts began to appear. They told of a princess buried alive. Old maids near death confessed that they had heard her cries, carried her food, seen blood on her hands. Priests wrote these down in secret notes, officially dismissed as fantasy, but for those who could read between the lines, it was proof. Even the diplomatic letters of the Duke of Belvoir, preserved in foreign archives, began to sound different when read again. Phrases that once seemed unimportant now formed a darker picture. His talk of long years of service far from home, his boasts of sacrifices for the dynasty, all of it now looked like a cynical mask. The real breakthrough came only in the 20th century, when historians were finally granted access to sealed archives. Among the dusty volumes, they uncovered a hidden report from a palace guard who, shortly before his death, had left a confession. Tucked into the binding of a book, beneath layers of glue, were pages in which he described guarding Eleonora, hearing her sing, watching her carve words into the walls. This testimony confirmed everything. Modern scholars examined the fragments that survived. Scientific tests proved the bloodstains on the cloth belonged to a noblewoman of the 15th century. Linguistic analysis showed the writings matched the education only a princess could have received. All the pieces of the puzzle came together.
What for centuries had been dismissed as rumor and legend turned out to be true. Eleonora had indeed been erased from history, but her words outlived those who tried to silence her. Once her story came to light, Eleonora was no longer seen as just one lost girl. Her fate became a symbol. For generations of princesses after her, her shadow lingered over every choice, every marriage, every step within palace walls. They were watched more strictly than ever before. Their letters were intercepted, their companions carefully chosen, their lives bound by suspicion. In the family's collective memory lived one terrifying thought. One girl had already broken the dynasty, and it could never be allowed to happen again. That is why, in later centuries, royal daughters were sent to convents at the slightest hint of disobedience. They were forced into marriages, their correspondence monitored, their friendships restricted. All of it was the direct legacy of Eleonora's fate. Her life became the justification for a harsher system of control over women in aristocracy. But her story also offered another lesson. Among historians, philosophers, even human rights advocates of the 19th and 20th centuries, Eleonora's name became proof that power is always willing to destroy the individual in order to preserve itself. Her messages, words scratched into stone, letters written in blood, came to be studied as some of the earliest records of the psychology of a victim, a young woman who could not speak openly, yet found a way to leave her mark. Feminist scholars of the 20th century called her the ghost of Europe, a voice reminding the world that silence always serves the powerful and truth is always sacrificed to the throne. For them, Eleonora stood as evidence that for centuries women's destinies did not belong to them. Even her son, whose fate remains unknown, became part of the myth. Whether he was killed as an infant or lived under another name, the mystery itself became a symbol. The child was like a lost key, proof that power does not only break lives, it erases them. And so, Eleonora, stripped of everything in life, gained in death a force her tormentors could never have imagined.